Hello there, and welcome into the Beat Sessions. I'm your host, Mitchell Weary. It's Tuesday, January 31st. Let's do this. Smashing Pumpkins released Act 2 of their three-act rock opera, Atum. Follows up Act 1, which was released on November 15th of 2022. A review that I did where many of you showed up and left some very honest opinions about your thoughts on that record in the comments. All joking aside, though, it was really cool to see so many of you show up and contribute and share your opinions on Billy and the future of the band and the record. We really dig that here at the Beat Sessions. Keith, MB, and I, it's our favorite thing about this channel is having an opportunity to interact with all of you, to learn something from all of you, and to just share your thoughts and to exchange those. It was really it was very fun doing that review and following up on it, and it made me very excited to prepare for Act 2 in this review in and of itself. I want to start this thing off by saying that this album is not bad. And what I mean by that is that we're talking about a band that's been around for 30 years. And this is a band that very early on in their career had an immense impact on the turn and the development of alternative rock and roll in American culture and in world culture in general. You could hear it even in Siamese Dream, that those outside influences. You knew that Smashing Pumpkins weren't just another grunge band, not just another rock and roll band. There was something a little bigger there. And when we got Melancholy, that's when it was fully realized. And I remember being 11 years old and there was so much music on that record that, had that not been a Smashing Pumpkins album, I probably would have never listened to, a song like We Only Come Out at Night or Lily, My One and Only. I mean, I listened to all of those songs because I fell in love with Billy and I fell in love with what the Pumpkins were doing on Siamese Dream and then the bigger goals that they had with Melancholy. And I feel like it was right around the same time that I was really starting to get into David Bowie as well. And I feel like those things really both coincided very well with each other. Records I listened to kind of secretively because, again, all my friends were listening to like punk and grunge and all this heavy stuff. And I liked that. But I was liking some of this other stuff, some of this other material. And so being as influential as they still are, the way that they shaped the landscape of alternative rock and roll, I feel like Smashing Pumpkins, with those albums, they've been placed on this pedestal as they should. They belong there. They're the foundation of so much of what we listen to. And so Billy on his own creatively, for a number of reasons, I could see, why he'd want to branch off and, get outside of that. The electronic influence in their music. It's something that we heard in the 90s. It's not a surprise that they're showing up and making this kind of music. And if you know anything about the band, before they recruited Jimmy, it was James and freaking Billy just playing with the drum machine and their guitars, listening to Depeche Mode and The Cure. And so the evolution of this band it feels logical, in my opinion, given the personalities that are at play here. And given the absence of Jimmy Chamberlain in the late 90s as well, sadly, with his drug abuse and the problems that were there. It's I feel like he is the spirit of this band, though. Like when he gets behind that drum kit, being classically trained as a jazz drummer, what he brings to the table and the way he's able to drive the tempo and the rhythms and the feeling of Smashing Pumpkins music. A song like Tonight Tonight would be nothing without the percussion. And there's so many other songs that the Smashing Pumpkins have where Jimmy is at the heart of them. And I feel like percussion doesn't get highlighted the way it should oftentimes. I feel like Ringo gets ragged on a bunch, such an underrated drummer. I feel that Jimmy's presence on Act 2 is a big part of what I'm really enjoying about this record. There's some cool rock and roll elements. I think Beguiled is arguably one of the biggest musical cock teases, pardon me, of all time. Considering that Billy hypes this thing up as, part of the Melancholy series and kind of having, like, I don't know, like the expectation as far as that would, what that would be, because there's so much music on Melancholy. The array of influences that drive that record, it's so versatile, it's so dynamic, it's incredible to listen to. So hearing this new project and hearing all those influences, it doesn't upset me. It's actually exactly what I wanted to hear. And again, Jimmy backing up more of these tracks, I feel, is so essential to what is giving these tracks a little more heart and a little more soul, because I didn't feel that in Act One. I felt more of Act One was driven by that drum machine. And I think it's very easy when you're creating music with that damn thing to come up with things that are kind of soulless, kind of heartless. And what I will say too is that in the 90s, when they were working with the electronic sound, really dig so much of what's on a door. And it's dark, it's edgy, it's gothic. And I think that if the Pumpkins are going to take that route, that's what works. Especially a song like I mean, you think about that. I mean, that's completely electronic. And like a lot of these songs, it's a long song. It drags on close to maybe 5 minutes. There's some that argue maybe that you could trim that up a little bit, but I listen to that track and I get lost in it. I think it's just intoxicating. It grabs me. I think it's dark and edgy and it hooks me right in. And so that's, I think, kind of part of what I'm not feeling on this new record is the edginess. And it's in the lyrics, and it's in the feel and the attitude, and it's in the production as well. You listen to a song like Beguiled, which means to charm or enchant, oftentimes deceptively. Just saying, just going to throw that out there. But you listen to that song and it's good, but I think it could be better. I think it lacks that punch, that gusto, just that fire of early Pumpkins, whether it's a full-on electronic element or whether it's full-on rock and roll or a combination of the two. I think the other thing that's kind of irking me a little bit about this new record is that more so on Act One than Act Two, and it's what made me like Act Two more as well, is when they're going with the electronic sound versus, earlier on, and, even with other stuff, Sear, some of the later records, it feels like the electronic influence is still driving an alternative rock sound, where some of these tracks really just feel like electro pop and it's throwing me off. Not necessarily that it's bad, but part of me feels that, maybe those tracks don't necessarily fit in with the good songs, if I could just put it simply like that. It feels like these are songs that belong under a different moniker, under a different project. And all joking aside, I don't think they're bad, but it doesn't strike me as Smashing Pumpkins music. I think that it's kind of one of those intangible things, but if you're familiar with this band and you listen to them, when you hear that electronic influence, it is balanced out with that alternative feel. And I feel like that's something that, has never left Billy's core. It's never left his spirit. I think that no matter what, he's always going to be that guitar-driven alternative rock and roll kid. And so I guess to get to the point, I feel like the expectations are high for a band that early on in their career had such a massive impact on, rock and roll music, alternative rock especially, and where we've ended up today. And they're just not the influential outfit that they once were. And it's because they've inspired all these other bands around them that are honestly making better music than them, than I feel at this point. And again, I don't feel that this album is bad, but I think that a big part of the issue is self-production, again, with Billy just rolling on his own. I think that he's the type of artist that, working with artists like Butch Vig and Flood and Mulder, Rick Rubin, it's always great to have that objective pair of ears in the studio. I feel like, someone that can just be like, hey, like, what if we tweak this and try it this way? I remember doing English Lit in college and having a pretty core group of individuals that I worked with, as far as, we all kind of had a good idea. We were all good writers, I'll just say it. And we all had a good idea of, each other's style and what we were trying to do within our work. And so that made it easy to just approach each other and take constructive criticism and make better papers. And I think all of us benefited from being in that group and having those interactions. And I can't help but continually argue this point, that I think that Billy is the type of guy that he's a great songwriter. He's a great musician, and needing that objective ear is not a bad thing. It just, especially if you're trying to make music that's appealing to people, what is wrong with having some outside influence coming in and just objectively, maybe highlighting a few things. And you can always ignore those things too. You don't have to listen to those opinions or work them in. But I think it's always important to be open to them. And I just think that in the future, when the Pumpkins make new music, it would be great to see an outside producer alongside the project, because I think that these guys will truly benefit from that. This thing, it kicks off with the Avalanche. It's light, playful synths. Got these like nature sounds, bird calls, kind of a peculiar vocal element to open this thing up. And then we get a really nice solid riff, but it takes about 90 seconds to get there. And that's where I'm just kind of like, this album is big on concept. That's what Billy is going for. But damn it, if, and certainly with the new wave feel on a lot of these tracks, I feel like that, these 11 songs could have maybe just held up on their own and had a good run as an independent album. It would have been, and I honestly, I would encourage Billy and this band to do that. I think that a lot of what makes your music so, I guess, intimidating is just the length of the albums. There's so much there to absorb. It's a lot. People are busy. People don't have all the time in the world to just sit and digest all this art. And especially, Keith and MB and I, we were looking at Dark Side of the Moon earlier this week, getting ready to celebrate its 50th anniversary in a month. And a great record, a record that Keith and I love. And it was MB's first time listening to it because she's never really been a Pink Floyd person. So that's always fun to have that experience alongside someone. And that's a record that, it has a 45-minute runtime. It does its thing. It has beautiful continuity in the music and themes that tie together just so wonderfully. I mean, the exploration of the dark side of the moon, the mentality is truly what makes that one of the more exceptional pieces of music out there. And I don't get that inspiration from this, and especially with the length, it's like, the bigger the project, it doesn't always make it a good thing. Game of Thrones didn't end so well. I'm just going to throw that out there. That was really good right up until the bitter end. And the end was bitter. That was rough. So, I again, like, I listened to this thing independently on its own. I'm thinking that I might just stream this thing on its own continually because it is growing on me. But that song Avalanche, to get back to the point, really nice riff, about 90 seconds in. Nice new wave feel. I love the percussion. I love that Jimmy's taking hold on this thing and having more of an influence. It really is making this Act 2 so much better than Act 1. Empires, your second track, comes out with a nice riff. Lots of those solid rock and roll elements that you'd expect. And, this is a good song. I think ultimately, though, it lacks a little bit of backbone. I think this is an example of needing that outside ear, a song that could have been heavier, could have been, maybe had a faster tempo. I think this song could be better. It kind of in a lot of ways just feels like a demo with the pace, and it lacks that ferocity. It lacks that Billy disdain for the world. I feel like he's gotten to a happier place, and that's had a big impact on the feeling and the effect of their music. I was listening to Through the Eyes of Ruby earlier. It's one of my favorite Pumpkin songs of all time. And there's just, I mean, that song, as far as, youth is wasted on the young, that line in that song, to the revelations of fresh-faced youth, no one will come to save you. So speak your peace in the moments drawn, but youth is wasted on the young. I mean, that's a heavy line in a song that, is very melodic, very operatic. It goes to a lot of beautiful places, especially in the coda. There's the piano in the intro, just the oceanic feel in that first verse. I love that track and the balance that's there. And it just feels like there's no balance. There's nothing that's really hitting you with that energy the way that it should in a song like Empires, especially because it's critical lyrically. I mean, and I don't think I really need to get into it too deep for y'all to figure out what Empires is about. And it lacks that energy. It lacks just balls, frankly. It bums me out. Neophyte is your third track. I dig it. It's a little slow to build. I feel like it's another track where it takes 90 seconds to get to where we need to be. But it's working for me though. I really like the middle portion of the song. For the production on the middle run of this record, there's a lot of tracks that fall into that 3-minute, 3.5 minute zone. And I think this is one of those tracks that at 4:30, if they really cut it down and just made it a solid like 3:15 effort, it could have gotten to the point. It could have hit hard and really hit well. It's a song that has a lot of potential, and I think there's a lot of good things there. I think it's one that you'll enjoy. Moss, your fourth track, you get a big stomping drum machine on this thing. All joking aside, I like the feel. It's a nice change of pace, industrial. The guitar riff that carries this thing is really cool too. I like the way that the bass balances out. It's a fun song. Night Waves, your fifth song, light, playful electro pop. But it doesn't, this is what I'm talking about as far as that 3-minute production. It's a little too sugar coated for me, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. And so for that reason, I don't think it has a bad presence on the record. It's growing on me. I've found it to be tolerable. Space Age is your sixth track. Light drum machine and synth open. I really like when Jimmy comes in and takes over on this track. I dig this track. I like musically what's going on. It's a mellow tune. It's got a good pace to it though. There's a lot here that reminds me of what the Smashing Pumpkins have done from beginning to this point, and I dig it for that reason. Every Morning is your seventh track. Ominous synth with these lighter elements, and then it kind of like builds into this lighter feel in the intro. Intro's kind of long though; it's about 2 minutes. Piano takes over about 2 minutes in though, and I really like when that happens. Then you get this bright new wave driven track. With that 6-minute runtime though, it does feel a bit bloated, especially on the back end with the coda. It's easy listening though, definitely that kind of track that. It kind of feeling a little sugar coated as well. It has that like 80s inspirational pop feel. Feeling slightly out of place. To the Grays, your eighth track, because there's a lot of music on this record that you're getting more of an 80s sci-fi synth feel with To the Grays, more of that proggy feel, and I like the way that it goes to work pretty quick, and it's still balancing that light poppy feel. I like that contrast and that element there, but it's working with kind of that darker, moodier Pumpkins element that I've always enjoyed personally. Beguiled, your ninth track. Yeah, might be the biggest tease of all time. Like the riff, I think it's a pretty solid composition. But like Empires, I think that this is a song that could have offered more. It could have been heavier. I really don't like the way it drifts into the chorus. I think that the way that softens up a little bit, it just doesn't appeal to me. I kind of wish that they'd taken the track in a slightly different direction. But it is good. It's not bad, The Culling is your penultimate track on Act 2. Light synths to open up. Drums bring in the rest of this track. It's got this gothic synth pop feel, which is working for me. I really like that element of the Pumpkins. The end on this thing drags a little bit, but overall it's not a bad way to lead into Springtime's your final track, which is a really good song. I like this song a lot, actually. I dig the psychedelic, playful feel in the beginning, and then you get this song where the acoustic guitar and the piano takes over. And you get this really just like, I love the emotional feel that comes from Billy on a song like this. Think of a song like 33 on Melancholy, one of my favorite Pumpkins tracks as well. I mean, that song is just so pretty. And I think that throughout the Pumpkins history, when you get Billy and just an acoustic guitar on a record, those tend to be some really pretty moments, some really outstanding, very shiny, excellent moments. And so I dig that they choose to end Act 2 on something like this. We'll begin as we end. It's an interesting line when you consider that, Billy and James starting off with just a drum machine and the two of them and their guitars. A lot of this kind of feels that way, but who's to say what Act 3 is going to be like? I'm very curious. I dig the fact that Act 2 had more of that drum-driven feel that Jimmy provides. Being classically trained as a jazz drummer, what he brings to the table, that influence in rock and roll music, talking about Rage Against the Machine, talking about so many artists on this channel where I highlight that. I love that. I think it makes rock and roll exciting when you consider something that's fundamentally locked into 4/4 timing. When you bring in loose jazz-driven percussion, it adds this excitement, this looseness, this element of you don't know what's about to come next. And I think that with the music that we're getting from the Pumpkins that's not hitting, it is that kind of monotonous drum machine feel, that feeling of knowing exactly where this track is going to end up. And that's that thankfully is not what we're getting on most of this record. So we have yet to please or pass this thing. I don't know. Part of me is just wanting to please this thing to check out those 10 extra tracks that drop when Act 3 goes down. But we'll definitely review Act 3 and see what that's like. And I'm kind of on the fence. You know, I have to see the price point on this package too. I imagine it's going to be a little steep. And you know, Melancholy, an album that, you know, you pay $100 for that vinyl package. That album is no doubt worth it. That is one of the best alternative progressive rock and roll records ever, period, of all time. What that album did to music completely changed the landscape of popular culture for almost the last 30 years. And so cut these guys a little slack, give this thing a listen. It's probably not going to hit you necessarily the way that you want it to, like those other albums have. And it probably never will. But I will say that it's not bad. So hope you find this review helpful. Thanks for tuning in. Tune into the live show here in a few hours. We're going to keep opening up this discussion on Billy Corgan and the Smashing Pumpkins, the idea of the concept record, when it works, when it doesn't, etc. Should be a good time. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Please like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel, do all things to help Keith, MB, and I blow this project up in 2023, and stay tuned throughout the week for more album reviews. We'll see you next time on the Beat Sessions.